From the sound of things, you guys enjoyed your break. Hopefully you're all with us. Are we all watered and fed? Has everyone had a drink? Everyone engaged in the free cookies and sandwiches, yes? Sandwich girl, have you had another sandwich? That's a lie. We know it's a lie. Okay, let's find our seats, people, and let's get right back to it. Now, for all of us watching online at the moment, hello, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, remember, we need you to send in your questions. You can do so by simply typing your questions in the question box. And for anyone in the room that doesn't want to go old school and put their hands up, you can type in your question by just simply accessing the question boxes via the QR code on stage. Right, time for another panel. I figure now's the chance to probably check and see just how many of you are still with us, how many of you aren't chatting over me chatting, and how many of you aren't suffering from the itis. So the lady at the back in the green who's having a chat with her mate who's eating a sandwich, are you ready for the next panel? Yes? She didn't even hear what I said. She's checking her phone. Are you lot ready for the next panel at the back? Hello? Is everyone in the front ready for the next panel? Good, because you're in it, so you better be ready. Okay, now if you have watched the news recently and felt pretty helpless, it's totally understandable because we've seen wildfires, we've seen floods, and everything in between. That feeling has a name, and that name is climate anxiety or eco-anxiety. New words to my vocabulary. We're about to have a panel about it, and the man leading it has an incredible reputation which I'm desperate to squash because he's a terrible human being. He is an incredible pickpocket. He stole his MBE. He definitely didn't deserve it. No, I'm joking. This man and I started working together nearly 2 decades ago, and he's one of the most solid human beings you'll ever meet. You'll meet Ade very, very soon, but first and foremost, have a look at this VT.
I remember when I was growing up, I'd come to this field all the time. My mum would bring paints and we'd sit there for hours. I'd use my little hands to spread colours across the bits of paper. One of my favourite things to paint was butterflies. They'd be everywhere in spring, so many, and it was so exciting as a kid. But the population has declined drastically in the past couple of years. Sometimes it's the little things I notice, the memories that, if I have children, they won't get to hold on to. Anxiety about the environment and climate change, the fires, the floods, the erosion, the pollution, the landfills. It's always been there in the back of my mind. But it's these little things. That's what makes me act. That's what makes me want to go out there and passionately fight for the planet.
What I really love about that film is the fact that it's personal. It's personal. You know, it speaks to all of our vulnerabilities because what happens to our planet affects us all. Eco-anxiety is real, you know, but it shouldn't be something that holds us back. You know, if we are able to channel and use the emotions that it elicits in the right way, you know, it can be a catalyst for action. So this next panel is all about turning anxiety into action. Are we ready for this? Yeah. Come on, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's change things up. So, stopping me from being anxious and feeling lonely on the stage, can we have a massive, massive welcome to our special guests today? So, first up, we have a broadcaster, filmmaker, and co-founder of Earthrise Studios, Mr. Jack Harries. Yes, brother. And next up, we want a very, very warm welcome. She stepped in at the last minute. So, guys, we want to be really loud for her. Please, it's critically acclaimed Oscar, Golden Globe, and BAFTA-nominated actress, Naomie Harris OBE. Welcome, welcome. You know, thank you both for joining me on stage. You know, as we've seen in that film, and everyone here can attest to, eco-anxiety is something that impacts us all emotionally. And both of you, if you could maybe talk to us about the first time you felt eco-anxiety, and how it impacted you. Jack.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, I'd just like to say how honoured I am to be sat next to two superstars here. It's a huge, huge privilege.
I mean, have you seen these numbers on YouTube? Come on, bruv, come on.
That was a cool introduction. And also just to congratulate you guys for being here and engaging in these topics. They are scary, they are overwhelming, it is intimidating. For me, it's been a huge journey of learning about this topic. I'm dyslexic, numbers don't come easily to me, science wasn't my strong point at school, so it's been a challenging journey, and it's motivated me to want to communicate it, to make it more clear and accessible to people, because if we're going to tackle this thing, we've all got to understand it. That's the first part of the process. For me, it started in 2015. I'd been invited to go to Greenland to make a film with the WWF about glacial retreat. And at the time, I'll be honest, I didn't really know a lot about it. I just heard trip to Greenland, and I was like, that sounds super cool. Let's go. And I spent a week there, and we camped on the Yakov Southern Glacier, which is one of the most southern glaciers in Greenland. And it changed my life, that trip, because we were literally transported to the front lines of climate change. And I think before that point, it had just been this kind of like, this thing I couldn't wrap my head around, like just this term that kind of made my brain just shut down and be like, well, that's scary, overwhelming. But I saw it that day. It's
that disconnect which, because we all feel like so many of us feel like we're so far away, and sometimes it needs people like us who are so fortunate to be that conduit. And actually see the reality.
100%.
And that's when it impacts you, doesn't it?
100%. And it is something, you're right, it feels like it's far away. It feels like it happens just to glaciers and to rainforests. And we live in London, you go about your day-to-day life and you're like, what does this matter for me? How does this impact my life? And I think just the last few months, we're all starting to understand how it's impacting our lives, right? Like what's happening in Pakistan right now, I think is a huge wake-up call to all of us. The wildfires in Los Angeles, suddenly it's starting to feel closer to home. But I wanted to make it my mission to try and communicate that. I felt very privileged to go to that climate front line, to see it and hear it and experience it firsthand, and to try and communicate that. So I've spent the few years since then meeting people, mostly on the front lines of climate change. I know you made an amazing series doing a similar thing, and that to me really changed my understanding of this issue as not just an environmental issue, but an issue of human rights and social justice. And then that started to make me think about my own responsibility, my own sense of like guilt and shame for my part in this thing, and wanting to tell those human stories. And I think ultimately people connect to people, right? And so the way to communicate this is to tell those human stories, to be vulnerable, to open it up so it's relatable. So that's been my journey. It's an up and down journey. I have days where I feel completely overwhelmed by it, and days where I feel completely empowered by the opportunity that's in front of us. That's been my journey.
Just delving slightly deeper into this, when you meet those people, and these people's lives are often completely different to us and to ours in terms of what they have to do day to day, what they have to overcome. And it can sometimes be overwhelming when you see them. What was it like for you hearing their stories? What sort of emotions did that draw out of you?
100%. So like the first place I think I traveled to that really changed my perception of this issue was Somaliland in 2017 during a really severe drought. And I met nomadic pastoralists, people whose livelihoods are relying on moving around cattle and farming the land. And of course, there was a huge drought, so the cattle were struggling to feed, to have water. And I remember driving to this village every day and just seeing skeletons of cattle lining their roads. And it was the first time I'd been confronted with the reality of what climate change means for people who are subsistence farmers, whose livelihoods are reliant on the environment. And again, living in a city, we're very detached from that, aren't we? Like, you just go get your food from a supermarket from Pret. How does it impact us if there's a drought, if there's too much rainfall? And so meeting that community really made me realize that this is already a life and death reality for many people. And not only that, and we all know this, but it's the very people who've done the least to cause this crisis who are suffering the most, right? That's people living in the global south. And that experience was backed up by going to Kiribati, a low-lying island nation. I know you've been to the Solomon Islands and meeting people who are living 2 meters above sea level. And I suddenly understood that those melting glaciers that seem very far away and intangible, they're contributing to sea level rise, which is threatening the livelihoods of these people I met. And so suddenly you start to join the dots, and you understand that no matter where you live, all of our lives are intimately connected to the environment, even if it feels far away. And that's the link we need to make, I think, to wake up and to get this thing.
Yeah, really good, really important, Jack. Naomie, what about yourself? Talk to me about when you first started feeling
Yeah, so I spoke to my sister because my sister is Gen Z, and I said to her, yeah, and since this is all about Gen Zs, I wanted to understand her experience and how she felt about climate change and how she was affected by eco-anxiety, because it's not something I've ever spoken to her about. And she said that she's always been aware of it. There wasn't a point where she suddenly was like, oh my gosh, climate change, this is a new issue for me. She's always been terrified. And I thought, how awful, because as growing up, I never experienced that. It's this whole eco-anxiety is something that is relatively new. And I got to go through my adolescence, go through my childhood without that sense of fear about the planet and the environment and the pollution of our waters and all of these things that really we don't want children to be burdened with, but they are. And actually, I thought, how awful is that? And I was really terrified by hearing how much anxiety she actually has and speaking to her friends as well. But then I thought, basically, I was oblivious when I was growing up, and how wonderful that this new generation have all this knowledge. They're watching all these amazing documentaries by filmmakers that are made like Jack, that are educating them about their planet. And I actually didn't have that when I was growing up. So it was a very personal journey for me to really get aware about my environment. And it actually started through my health, because I have scoliosis. So I have a metal rod that was put along my spine when I was 15 years old. I had an awful operation where I spent a month in hospital. I had to learn to walk again, had to learn to sit up again, I had to learn all these basic things. And so I never took my health for granted in the way that the people that I grew up with did. So I never drank alcohol or did drugs or any of these kind of things, but also I became obsessed with health. And I wanted to do everything I possibly could to stay healthy. And that's what led me to organic food. Because I thought, I want to put the purest possible things into my body so I can never, ever go back to hospital, if possible. And then I thought, well, how is this food produced? And if there's organic food, what's happening to regular food that most people are eating? And how are we treating our environment? And then that was the wake-up call for me about, oh my gosh, there's this whole environment, an industry out there that I hadn't been aware of. And there's a whole chain reaction that's happening with man at the helm and what he's doing to the environment. And it terrified me. And I thought, what can I do as little Naomie to make a difference at this point? And that's when I became really impassioned about doing everything I possibly can to really to reconnect with the environment, because I really think that it's man's disconnection from nature that has led us to this point. And it's only through man's reconnection with nature that we're going to solve it. So we do, I do things like take off my shoes and put my feet in the earth and ground and reconnect with the earth. I go out into nature. I hug trees. People think I'm crazy. I don't care, because I think that nature has a wisdom. And I really think if you open to nature, it will speak to you and tell you how it wants to be heard, how it wants to be listened to, how it wants to be engaged with. And I think that's how we really make a difference.
When I take off my shoes, my whole family leaves the house. Everyone on the street leaves.
Do it outside, it's okay.
It's just not happening. But no, it's true. It is about reconnecting with the planet. And it sometimes frustrates me, the fact that we have to stop and think about what is so natural. What is so natural? This is our planet. For me, in terms of eco-anxiety, I think, because I've traveled so much, and I've really tried to cut it down because I've started to become so freaked out about what's happening to our planet and how much time we have left. But there were a couple of moments that really struck me. There was a couple of years ago, I was in Bangladesh, and I was with a really amazing climate journalist, a guy called Tanjil Rahman, and we were going along the Sundarbans, and he was telling me about this wonderful ecosystem that goes through Bangladesh to India into the Bay of Bengal, and how all the amazing things they were doing to try and help Bangladesh, survive sea level rise. And we had these maps of future sea level rise around the world that we wanted to show him as part of the film. And I remember I hadn't seen the maps myself, and I looked at it, and I saw if we didn't change in the time that we have in the next 90 months, 120 months, that most of Bangladesh was going to be underwater. So many places around the world were going to be underwater. And it absolutely freaked me out. Totally freaked out. And what freaked me out even more was to see Tanjil's response. The fact that he was going to lose his home. And it made me come back to the UK. I've got a son, he's 19 months old, and I looked at him and I just looked and just thought, what are we doing? What are we doing? Look, he's this amazing, wonderful, beautiful creature, and what are we going to leave on this planet? And it just made me so frustrated. Now, we're in the business of making people care. That's what our job's about. And the thing that makes me most anxious is when people don't care. And I think how I'm able to go on this journey of turning my anxiety into action is through knowledge. I need to know. I need to understand about our planet. I need to understand how it works, so then I can make the changes that are necessary. I think that's what today has been all about, is grasping that knowledge. Jack, how do you manage your eco-anxiety?
Imperfectly, I think. I think there is no magic solution. I think climate anxiety, eco-anxiety can look like many different things for many different people. As you said, like it can be a fear and an anxiety for what's coming, what we know is coming down the line. It can be a shame and a guilt for like what's happened so far. I think above all, it can be a sense of like powerlessness and overwhelm. I know I certainly feel that on a daily basis. And there are many ways that we can tackle it. I think the first thing is acknowledging it, and not pathologizing it. I think so often when it comes to mental health, we pathologize it. We're like, it's this issue that we just kind of need to get rid of. Like, you're not very well and we just need to get rid of it. It's natural and normal. I had a chance to interview an amazing psychologist earlier this year called Dr. Caroline Hickman, who's been studying climate anxiety for 10 years. She published this amazing report in The Lancet, which I recommend going and having a look at. But when I interviewed her, that's what she said to me. She was like, the first thing to say is this is a natural and normal response to the crisis we're facing. And then she went on to say, she said, in fact, I'd be worried if you weren't feeling this way.
Yes.
Like, this is an existential threat to people on the planet. So that's the first thing. I think we can feel guilty for feeling these feelings in a weird way. And then the other thing I think you feel, as you said at the start, that idea of being lonely. When I started to feel these feelings, I felt very lonely and isolated in them. You go and see friends at the pub and you start to talk about it and they're like, what are you on about? Like, you just need to get out a bit more. And you're like, but this is real and it's scary. And so finding...
It's a real party pooper, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't want to be that guy.
Yeah, you start saying stuff and everyone's looking at you and like, like, it's the climate crisis guy coming now. Yeah. Hide the biscuits.
Yeah. I've definitely got that reputation. People just swerve away from you. Or like, I was having my makeup done before and they were like, what are you talking about? I was like, climate anxiety. I see they're like, oh God, like, I'm that guy. But there's something like all mental illnesses or mental health issues, there's something very powerful about speaking about it, putting a name to it, because more often than not, other people can relate. And it's about being vulnerable in that way. So for me, it was finding a community, and that started by joining Extinction Rebellion. I was there very early on and sort of like just having those chats with people, like, we need to do something. And, after those trips...
You old crusty, you.
Yeah, I was one of those crusty hippies. Yeah, that's it, shouting in Oxford Circus. I became one of them. I'm just a stereotype in every way, shape, and form.
Exactly.
But there was something very powerful about that, and I think at the start it wasn't very constructive the way I chose to channel it. Just literally shouting from the top of my voice, walking down Oxford Circus. I super glued myself to the front of a petroleum conference and got arrested. And my mum was like, "Jack, come on, years of university for this."
Is that really painful? The super gluing?
Do you know what? I don't think I was so terrified I didn't put enough glue on my hand, so it didn't actually stick. So for about a few hours, I was just pretending to be stuck. And the police arrived, and I was holding a sign, and then I did the worst thing I could have done. There were 8 of us glued to the wall, and I dropped my sign, and I went, oh, God. And the policeman was just like, you're a terrible excuse for a climate activist. And so I was whisked away, and that was the end of my activist career. But I think I did, and lockdown happened. I think many of us were stuck inside, and I look back at those months I'd spent out in the streets, and I think it was amazing what Extinction Rebellion did. But I had to ask myself, am I using my skills as best I can? What is it that I can lend to this movement? I wish I was a scientist. I wish I was an inventor. It's like some of these people come up with amazing solutions. My thing is making YouTube videos and communicating. So I was like, fine, let me bring that to the movement. And that's why I started to make more and more films about it. And that's the message I'd give. Like, everyone in this room has a particular skill that someone else doesn't have. And I'd encourage you to lend that to the movement. Like, this is something that's going to take every single one of us. It can't just be a few of us out in Oxford Circus, shouting from the top of their voice. That won't cut it. So ask yourself what your skill is and lend that to the movement. I think that's the most constructive thing you can do.
Nice. Now, Naomie, how was understanding and managing your eco-anxiety? Have you channeled that into your work, or as an actor, into your instrument?
Actor, I love that.
Yeah. Isn't that what they say?
Actor. Not actor, but I like the actor bit. It's very flamboyant.
I'm gone. You're getting dissed, man.
No, I mean, the reality is actually that, the film industry, the TV industry is one of the most polluting industries there is to be part of. And so I have to really reconcile that. This is my career choice. It's something that I'm extremely passionate about, but it's also something that is highly detrimental for the environment. So one of the things I make sure of is that I'm always part of projects that have a powerful message. Like I just spend 8 months filming The Man Who Fell to Earth, which is all about climate change, which is a 10-part series, which you can catch on Paramount Plus.
Nice.
I'm plugging.
Nice.
But, thank you. But yeah, I think, also another thing is just like using my voice, using my voice in this industry to try and make a difference in whatever small way I can. So, for instance, on many of the productions that I've been part of, they're into using these disposable plastic bottles. There is no need for that at all. Like, everybody can just get a canister with their name at the beginning of filming, and then we have tanks where people just fill up with water. And so I just say that is something that I think is non-negotiable, and I want on every production that I'm part of. And that is happening now more and more. So it's little things like that that actually make a huge difference. Because if you think there's about 180 people on a film set in a day, there's 180 bottles of plastic that are being thrown away every single day, and most people are drinking more than one bottle. So this simple thing of just like having a flask that you refill actually has a huge impact. So it's things like that.
What was the response when you make these challenges? Because I think one of the things to bear in mind is you're Naomie Harris. If you're telling people, hey, we've got to change, they're going to change. But there's people out there who might not feel they have that agency and they have that power.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think that I'm in a very privileged position, and that's why I have to be extremely careful about how I use my voice and using it for things that I'm truly passionate about and really trying to make a difference. So I was one of the people who voiced an infomercial, I guess it would be called, for Extinction Rebellion, and I had to think really hard about that because it was a time, it was 2 years ago. Most people were like, Extinction Rebellion, they're just stopping me from getting to work every day, all these bloody protests that are happening all the time. But, it's something that I think, yeah, that's true. It can be inconvenient, some of the demonstrations that have happened, but it's for a wider cause that is just so much more important than that. So I think using my voice wisely is incredibly important to me, but I think everybody has a voice. You as a consumer at home, what choices, what you choose to buy and what you choose not to buy makes a huge difference. Industries are taking note, and ultimately industries are money-making businesses. So if you decide, I want to go with the eco products and I don't want to go with anything that's polluting the environment, they stop, they listen, and they do forums like this, you know. So I think everybody has a voice and everyone should use it.
No, that's really, really valuable information. I mean, one of the things we forget and we get caught up and lost in is we tend to think that power comes from the top down, and we sort of sit back and say, let them sort it out. But in reality, power comes from the bottom up. We're the ones in control. It's what we say, what we do, that can make the difference. They rely on us being quiet and being meek and like lambs. But we have to get involved. We have to use our voices. It's so, so important. What about you, Jack? How have you channeled your eco-anxiety into your work?
Well, I'd love to share the stories, actually, of a few people I met making a series last year. I had a chance to make a 11-part series called Seat at the Table. It's out on YouTube. Check it out. I'm learning. And this was a series we made in the run-up to COP26. And the aim of this series was to platform the voice of those on the front lines of the climate crisis, those who are most affected, those who don't have a seat at that negotiating table at the COP conferences, and bring it to Glasgow. And so it was during the pandemic, so there was a big plan to travel around the world. That was cancelled, and I think it actually ended up being for the best, because it meant we didn't create carbon emissions. I didn't travel anywhere. And we also empowered local crews in 8 different countries around the world to tell these stories. And I remember the day, it was meant to be this big round-the-world trip, and I remember the day the producer called me and was like, so, Jack, I'm afraid you're not going around the world anymore because of COVID, but how about a trip from the very bottom of the UK to the top of the UK on a bicycle? And I was like, oh, Colin, it's not quite going to the Maldives, is it? But yeah, let's make it. And it ended up being such an incredibly inspiring trip. And I'll be really honest, when I started making that show, I was in a period of feeling really down. I was really struggling. And I remember having conversations with Alice, my partner, how can I go on camera and offer hope when I'm feeling totally hopeless? I didn't know how I could do that. And I decided just to try and bring that vulnerability to that series. And it may sound like a cliche, but the people I met on that journey completely changed my perspective of the issue. And a few examples, one of them that I met very early on was a woman called Poppy Okocha in Totnes. Some of you may know her. She has an amazing social platform. And she has this garden in Totnes. It's the size of an average garden in the UK. And she's turned it into this unbelievable rewilding project with vegetables and chickens and flowers. And she documents this thing. And she decided to take matters into her own hands, like you said. And I think climate change is a systemic issue. It's a symptom of a broken system. It's important to remember that. I personally have lost a lot of faith in those that have the power to create that top-down change. So it falls onto our shoulders. And that doesn't just look like recycling more and taking a tote bag to the supermarket. We can get our hands dirty and get stuck in on a community level. And that was the thing that really inspired me. Seeing the community in Totnes, it's a transition town, which means they're working together to transition away from fossil fuels and become energy independent. And Poppy is one person who's at the heart of that movement. I remember meeting a guy called Liam up in Scotland who was rewilding rainforests in Scotland. Did you know there are rainforests in Scotland? I had absolutely no idea.
Yeah, Scotland's got some
and this guy's in his early 20s and he just goes out every day and he's rewilding these rainforests that suck down carbon out of the atmosphere. Such a beautiful thing to do. I remember going to the Orkney Islands, these islands in the top of the UK, and I met a young man called Ryan who was 26. And he was working on this incredible hydro turbine called the Orbital 2, which looks like a sort of submarine floating in the ocean. And as the current comes through, it spins the propellers and generates energy. And some of you may know the Orkney Islands are almost totally independent in terms of energy. They create a lot of their own energy. And actually, they send energy back to the UK via a cable under the ocean. And I sat on this amazing thing, the Orbital 2, with Ryan, who's a young engineer working on it. And he said to me, he didn't know my background, he was like, I just don't get all these people out in Oxford Circus shouting, in the streets and gluing themselves to things. Why don't they just bloody get on with it and do something?
Yeah.
And I was looking at him on this amazing machine thinking, do you know what, Ryan? Fair enough, you're just doing it. You're supporting your community. Yeah. And so it totally changed my perspective on how to tackle this issue. It is a global issue, but it requires all of us to do our thing. And we can only do that locally and with our own communities. And I think that's how you stop it being so paralyzing and overwhelming. Look around you and ask what it is you can do to support your local community.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, look on this panel, we've got 3 of us from 3 different generations, and we all have the same goal. We all have the same feelings. So we're not alone in this. there is a community, there is a power, there is an energy to make things change and to make a difference. Now, it was slightly remiss of me at the beginning because I didn't remind you guys to get your questions in, because this is all about you at home and all of you in the audience as well. And hopefully you haven't ignored me and thought up some questions, and we're going to have a look and see. We'll go to the audience first. Okay, we'll go to the audience first. Has anyone out here got a question for our panel? Here we go. We've got a hand up. This young lady here.
Thank you. Hi, guys.
Could you stand up? Sorry.
Okay.
Just so I can see you, you know, that's why.
I work in marketing for a children's footwear brand. My question for you guys is, how can a brand authentically communicate climate issues to educate and engage their consumers? And as like a secondary, what brands do you guys believe do this really effectively at the moment?
Wow, good questions.
Yeah.
Questions.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'll bring it back to telling human stories. Like, I think when it comes to brands, to manufacturing, I've found it fascinating sitting here and listening to what goes behind Puma and making these shoes. And I realize how little I know about manufacturing processes, about a lot of the companies that I buy things from. And I know there's been some conversation about it today, but the first step is transparency. And I admire it, like you guys holding your hands up and being like, we're not perfect. We're figuring it out. None of us are perfect. None of us wanted to be in this situation. We're all being forced with this overwhelming crisis to tackle it. And let's be honest and vulnerable in that process. Yeah. Talk about what we're doing, talk about what we're messing up on. And I think we can do that by sharing human stories. And I think there are many brands like Textile Exchange are an incredible one. Vivo Barefoot Shoes, they do a lot of amazing stuff. Patagonia, that tell the human stories of the people that work in their supply chains, because people connect with people, not numbers. It's just, it doesn't go into the brain, doesn't compute. But when you can learn someone's human story, then you can understand. And so I would say, engage the people that are in your supply chains and tell their stories, lift them up, put them on your platforms, embrace socials to communicate those stories so that people can understand that, that greater sense of transparency is what consumers, what our generation, Gen Zers, desperately, desperately want.
Naomie?
Yeah, I mean, I think the wonderful thing is there is so much awareness today, and there is so much of a desire to make a difference and to do what the consumer wants to get involved. They want to make a difference. And so I think if you're, loud and proud about what your brand's about, then I think you'll inevitably attract consumers because they want to be part of a movement. They want to make a difference. And for me personally, I am partnering, it's just announced, I'm partnering with a brand called Omnes, who are amazing. They use so much of their brand is like using recycled materials, and it's all about fair wages for everybody that's involved in the company, and from every step along the way. And they are an incredible brand that I am really excited to be part of. And that's what I'm really passionate about, is partnering with brands who really do want to make a difference and make the world a better place, ultimately.
I think you hit on a really important point there, fair wages as well, because one of the things about solving this climate crisis is we can restart things and try and create more parity. Because I think part of the reason why we are where we are is because of so much inequality, inequity in the world. And this is an opportunity for us to get that parity. We've got a question coming online, thank you for both of you, and it's about eco-anxiety. Is there a gender divide? Are women more inclined to suffer from eco-anxiety? I don't know.
I mean, I don't know any stats on that, but maybe one thing I'll contribute to that is, I assume not. I think women are probably just better at talking about their mental health and being vulnerable. Yeah. It's a whole other topic, but I think there's a huge issue amongst men about being vulnerable and talking about the way they feel. Suicide is the biggest killer of men under 40. What's going on there? So I think as men, we need to get better at opening up and being vulnerable about how we feel. But to me, it wouldn't make sense. It would be affecting women more than men. This is something that affects every single one of us. Although many women are on the front lines of climate change disproportionately.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Naomie, I don't know what
No, I totally agree. I think men and women are equally affected, so I think they would be equally concerned as far as I can tell. Yeah.
it's about talking about it, and that's the thing. I mean, if we talked about this in the first place, I don't think we'd be here, if we'd start talking about this 50 years ago when scientists were warning about things like this. Have we got any more questions in our audience? Have we stunned you all? Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
And you've given me the eyes as well. I'm scared. I'm worried about this question. Someone get a mic to this lady, quick, before she comes up and flying kicks me.
Oh, and I promise I won't hurt you. I guess you talked overall about eco-anxiety and how you deal with it overall, but just personally, especially Jack, you spend a lot of your time telling stories on behalf of other people and getting them platform, but it does have an effect as a storyteller, and even as an actress, you take on that personality of someone else, so you're telling that story. How do you personally, rather than talking about everyone overall, how do you personally deal with your eco-anxiety, and do you have any tips for people who do not manage it?
So, personally, obviously not everyone can do this, but I'm building an eco house. So it's a passive house, solar powered, as off-grid as I possibly can be, and really trying not to impact the environment in any way possible, and also to be as self-sustainable as I possibly can be. But obviously that's huge, so and not everybody can do that. But I think you start small, and you start with things like something that I'm really passionate about. It's not a sexy thing to talk about, but is the fact that sanitary ware is a huge cause of pollution in our environments, right? And women could make a simple change, which is to use reusable sanitary ware, and that would have an enormous impact on the environment. So it's like tiny little things that we think are small and we think are personal to us, but actually the ripple effect, if everybody does that, is huge. Switching from regular toilet paper to recycled toilet paper, these all send huge signals to the industries to say, people are concerned and they are willing to engage, they want to make a difference, and therefore the industry changes its course of action, because ultimately I think all the solutions are out there. It's not that they don't exist, it's just that the motivation isn't there, and the motivation actually comes from each and every one of us as consumers.
Jack?
It's beautiful. Yeah, I think finding ways to turn your anxiety into action, to me, knowing that I'm doing something, however big, however small, is what gets me out of bed every single morning. It can be very overwhelming, it can be paralyzing, but taking those little steps makes a difference. And ultimately, it's about just looking after your mental health. I recently went and did a 10-day silent meditation retreat 3 weeks ago. Never meditated before in my life. It terrified the hell out of me, but it had a huge positive impact on my mental health. Just sitting down for 10 days, not being on my phone, not engaging in the news, learning this incredible ancient skill of meditation that's been around for 2,500 years. Breath work is something I find really helpful. Exercise is something I find really helpful, and just being really militant about putting those into my daily routine, because we all need to look after our self-care. If you're burnt out, then you're no good to anyone. So look after yourself as well as the planet. Our activism has to be sustainable as well.
I'm so fascinated about meditation because it's something that I try, but my mind is so rubbish. It goes
all of us
in
are.
all places. I'm like, where's my phone? I need it. No, don't leave me in my own head. Don't leave me in my own head. But I think you're right. It is about personal mental care. As an athlete, I've spent so much time thinking about my physical health, but it's only recently, over recent years, that you start thinking, actually, your mental health is just as important, if not more important, and we're going to need it. We are really going to need to be mentally and physically strong in the next few years if we're going to deal with this. Thank you, both of you. Got another question coming in from online. And how do you make people care about the environment and the climate? This is a big, big question. It's a question that keeps me awake at night, in all honesty. I constantly try to think of different ways. Because the people who get it, they get it, and that's all right. But there are still a really important group of people that we have to engage. What do you think we need to do, Naomie?
So I actually don't think the issue is about people caring. I think people do care. It's that they don't feel empowered. So they feel like it's overwhelming. What can I do? So I'm just going to give up. So that's why things like, the anti-plastic straw movement was so powerful, because people thought, well, here's a really, really simple thing I can do. It's just not use a plastic straw when I'm drinking. And it's been massive. It's been huge. Like, no one wants to, in their establishments, wants to give you a plastic straw anymore. You can't find a plastic straw for love nor money, right? They're all paper now. So that's huge. So I think it's really about great PR. And industries getting behind single point messages, because I think otherwise it just gets too confusing for people. But if they know that there's one simple action that they can take and that will make a difference, then I think people can get on board with that. I think our lives are so busy and overwhelming that you're just like, I don't know, I can't take on the entire world. And you can't, everybody's got to, do their own little bit. But I think if industries help them to show them where they can make changes, small changes, I think that's when people get on board.
They need to toughen up those paper straws, though. By the time you finish a drink, they're mush. It's like pulp. I mean, what is that all about?
You don't need a straw. I don't even know this straw. We should just get rid of straws. Why do we need them?
I need a straw. Come on. No, you're right. We don't need straws. Jack, what about you? What's your thoughts on making people care?
I think we need to change the way we tell the story. We can't talk about this as like some big sacrifice that we need to make. We can't point fingers at one another and say, this is your fault, you're responsible, you're a hypocrite. We need to paint a picture of the world that's so beautiful, we have no choice but to go there. Earthrise, the production company I run, we talk about that. We say we need to build a bridge so beautiful that you have no choice but to cross it. We need to paint a picture of the world that we need to move into. And also we need to communicate that there's a better world on the other side for people in this. Like, this doesn't have to be a sacrifice. Let's look at the energy crisis we're currently facing. It's hitting those who are already suffering the most, those who are on the poverty line. And so let's be energy free, right? Like, we're already relying on Russia for gas. Like, there is so many solutions that can come out of tackling the climate crisis. It doesn't need to be a sacrifice. Let's paint a picture of a better world and move towards it.
Right. I want to quickly go on to another question, because I don't think we've got that much time left, which is coming from online, and it's like, any tips on how to remain calm when there's just so much bad news? So I think it was like there at the start where we talked about forest fires and sea level rise and even the war in Ukraine, all of that stuff. How do we stay calm in that storm?
For me personally, I totally agree with Jack that it really is about meditation. And honestly, I want to tell you that it doesn't matter that your mind chatters, because everybody's mind chatters. It's okay.
You don't know what's going on in
No,
there.
but it's okay.
It's
like the idea is to sit and be an observer of that chatter. Okay. So instead of engaging with the chatter, you're aware of it. And
blank myself.
But you realize that there's that voice, and then there's you. There's another part of you. And the more you start to tap into that other part of you, you realize that that's the still part of you, that's the calm part of you, that's the peace-centered, the love-centered part of you. So I do a lot of meditating. And also the other thing I would say is, give yourself the gift of not rushing into your day, because I know that most people get up and they're straight onto their phone, and then you're bombarded, So it's I would say start your day by filling yourself up with your own voice, which is through meditation, through exercise as well, and through just silence. No watching any media for the first hour of your day, so that you start to hear your own peace-loving center. Because we all have it. It's just that there's so much noise around that it's often difficult to get in touch with it.
I feel like taking my shoes off right now. That's beautiful. It's beautiful. What about you, Jack?
I can't really top that answer. I'd say delete the news apps, turn off your notifications, and sit in peace.
Listen, guys, that was absolutely brilliant. It was really fascinating. I feel really privileged to have had this opportunity to spend this time with you. I hope you feel energized, feel more positive, and less alone. I'd really love you to give a massive round of applause to our wonderful guests.